Hello family, this is African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. So the French president, Emmanuel Macron, was once again done a speech, and this time in his speech he has shown once again basically his disdain for African independence and African lives. Now the context of the speech, and I'm going to play the speech in a moment, he's basically given a speech on the issue of African woman fertility. And in his view, and he's saying this to an audience, you know, of there's African people in this audience, which is funny to me, but he's saying that it's, to him, the fact that so many African women are having multiple children, or not choosing to only have one child or two children, that these women are having multiple children, is evidence of miseducation, or the African woman not being educated. So I'm going to let you watch the video, and I'm going to explain afterwards why, the reason why he's actually so upset about this, the reason why he actually wants to try to make you as African people think that you're backwards, because actually it's him trying to make his problem your problem.
In Africa is about girl education. 63% of non-educated adults today are women. That's the deep root of the gender inequalities. One of the critical issues we have regarding the African demography is the fact that this is not a chosen fertility. I always say, please present me the lady who decided, being perfectly educated, to have 7, 8, 9 children. And this is not teaching African people from New York. This is a pure bullshit to say that. A lot of African leaders today now dare to have this kind of speech. This is just because a lot of girls were not properly educated. That's why for me education is the main answer. First, to avoid the worst. Second, to maximize opportunities in African countries and in the rest of the world. Third, to properly monitor demography, because it will be a chosen demography.
So if you're like me, you might be watching this video of him and you're wondering, okay, you're a French man and you are talking about Africa right now, and you are so bothered by what's going on in Africa. Why do you care about what's going on over there? If anything, you should be talking about French issues. You should be talking about what's going on with French women. I mean, you don't see Africans going to forums talking about what's going on in Switzerland or what's going on in France, what's going on in England. So why are you so concerned with the African fertility rates? And it's really a mask for what the real concern is. So he's giving it in such a way to try to convince the audience that I'm so concerned because African women need education, and if they have education, then why would they not want to use birth control and not have all these children? Which is a very ignorant mindset to begin with, because different people may actually cherish having a family, actually cherish raising children, actually cherish having a village around them and not just living as individuals. Because of that, you look down on that lifestyle. But beside the ignorance and the racism behind it, the real reason why he's trying to make this idea that the African woman just not educated and she needs to be no longer having so much fertility, the reason he's trying to sell this argument is because there's a real issue that's going on, and that's the African population explosion. So if you don't know, Africa's population, African people, and internationally, all around the world, they have been skyrocketing. And it's not just that they're skyrocketing, it's also that other populations are actually decreasing. Chinese population, or the Asian population, is decreasing. Europe's population has been decreasing for a long time. And yeah, African people, they keep increasing. So right now, African people make up about 1.3 billion people in the world. And the projection is by 2050 that 2.5 billion people will be of African descent in this world. So this is actually freaking people out who are basically the countries that have a lot of African immigrants, because obviously if the situation stays the same as far as the power dynamics of Europe having all of Africa's wealth and therefore not just controlling the wealth, but being able to control the opportunity, well, where are all these people going to go? Are they going to stay on the continent that's being raided and exploited? More than likely, they're going to try to flee into the country that has all the opportunity. And this is a very big scare to Europeans. They won't say it like that. They try to make it seem like that they're just concerned about population growth or because of the African economy or what's going to happen with Africa. But the reality is they haven't been bothered by all the things that have been happening in Africa as a result of their policies. They haven't been bothered by the famines. They haven't been bothered by the wars. They haven't been bothered by any of these things that has been killing people. And the other thing that to keep in mind also is that it's not just the fertility rates that have increased of African women, but also less African African people are actually living longer, number one. And number two, African babies, they have a lower infant mortality rate. So all of these things together have increased the population, and it kind of makes you think, well, if this is such a problem to you, what have you been doing in the past to try to instigate high mortality rates? What have you been doing in the past to try to instigate low life expectations if you've always seen this as being a possible threat to your dominance? So I'm going to read from an article. The article is called, it comes from a site called Voice of Europe, and I will post the link in the description. And this is really how they really, it's kind of like the article you would say, wow, this is so blatant, just the racism behind it. But honestly, this is what they're really thinking. This is what the threat really is. You're not going to have a lot of people come out and say it like this, but this is actually what Europeans who are in these types of countries are fearing. So it says, since 2010, 1 million sub-Saharan Africans have moved to Europe. President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, has already warned that millions more will come within the next 5 years as Africa does not take action. Most people are well aware that even though life in Africa has improved, it's still not great and definitely not as comfortable as Europe. That is also the reason Africans give for wanting to move to Europe. Europe has opened up a new route for people smuggling when it bombed Libya. The country is still in a state of semi-anarchy, which is perfect for slave traders and people smugglers. What should Europeans expect over the upcoming decades with such a massive population boom on its southern borders? The UN seems to welcome the development as an opportunity to counter Europe's decline in population. The report by the United Nations investigates the possibility of filling the gaps in Europe's population with replacement migration from areas that do not experience population growth, notably Africa. The outcome can be anywhere from Fortress Europe to Euro-Africa. Now listen to this. The first option, the option I just mentioned, seems unlikely as it's deemed morally unacceptable, while the second option will mean that the end of European welfare states and culture. So that shows you a hidden agenda right there. It's not just about having people come in, but it's about what will happen if people come in, and what would obviously happen if African populations start filling in the gaps where Europeans are no longer populating is the end of European culture. So this is about preservation of self. This is about preservation of Western European society. It's not about trying to help the African. It's not about trying to do the right thing. And this is what we have to understand. Whenever the French president comes out, and Prince Harry from Britain also came out and said this, a similar thing, we have to understand that the reason why they're going to try to frame it in this way, like, oh, we're trying to help you, you poor woman, you don't know better than not to have children, oh, you need birth control, oh, you need to know that you don't have to do this, here, take contraceptive, oh, yes, you want to be an educated woman, oh, well, educated women, they don't want to have children like this, so, do the right thing. The reason why that is framed like this is because the oppressor only wins when it comes to trying to get what they want by trying to make their problem our problem. So it's their problem that they have maintained control of African resources for their own benefit and for the detriment of Africa. So Europe is prospering off of the goods of Africa, the resources of Africa. And if Africa had control of its own resources, Africa would actually be able to take care of its own people. When African people actually say enough is enough, we want control of our natural resources, we want to be the ones to actually control who the selling of the resources, who gets what. We want to be able to act in our own interest and not in the interest of these governments. When Africa does that, it will be able to more than accommodate the population and have its own dialogue about how do we possibly curtail further population growth if needed. But that's not the case because Europe controls Africa's resources. Europe controls Africa's controls their politics. They control everything. So because of that, they basically tried to make us think that it's our problem that they have this control over our resources and that we won't be able to provide for our own populations because they have control over our resources. So it's all just understand this is all a scheme to try to make you identify your oppressor's problem as your problem. Because when you do it, and you see a lot of people doing it, a lot of people who get educated in Western education, they might go to school in Europe, they might go to school in the United States, and they come back to their country. And what are they talking about? They're not really looking at the fact that the resources aren't being controlled by the people. They're not looking at the fact that neocolonialism is running rampant. Instead, they're going to talk about things like contraception. And they're going to talk about things like access to contraception and stuff like that. Low fertility. They're going to talk about those things. Not to say that those things, hey, maybe you do want to talk about it, but what about all these other pressing issues that are killing people every day, that are taking from people every day, that are totally destabilizing the country to where the people cannot provide for themselves? Shouldn't those things be talked about? But the Western education does not prepare you to talk about those things. They only prepare you to talk about things that are in their interest. So people are coming from these schools and they're not talking about neocolonialism. You hardly hear these Oxford graduates, you hardly hear these Harvard graduates talking about things that are going to actually have the effect of destabilizing the system. Instead, you'll hear them talk about things that are going to help the system maintain dominance. And a lot of times they think they're doing the right thing for their people because the system tells us that. They really tell us that this is the most important thing, that the African fertility rate is the most important thing going on in Africa. So you really go with a conviction. But that's why we really have to, as African people, unlearn what we have learned from our oppressor and make sure that we're actually analyzing independent of European propaganda and actually looking at the situation for what makes sense. Does it really make sense that make this the #1 issue when we have other pressing issues going on? Does that really make sense when you have the wars going on in Congo, when you have the interethnic conflicts going on in Cameroon, where people are dying by the dozens? Does it make sense to be talking about that and not the reason for that? And I think the obvious answer should be no. And one more thing about this, we have to understand that the idea that the demonization of women who and men and families that want to have large families. That's all it is. They're trying to demonize people who have this mindset the same way that they have demonized things like socialism. Because if you demonize a lifestyle, then that makes the person feel like they are backwards for living their traditional society. A lot of these women, I'm sure that there are some women who definitely don't want to have kids, but a lot of them do. And a lot of them are making independent decisions, intelligent decisions. It doesn't make them any less educated. They're making intelligent decisions that I want to have another child, I want to have more children, because children actually are a blessing. That's something that this culture is trying to make us think is not true. Children are a blessing. Having a child, having many children, that traditionally, that has always been considered one of the most fruitful types of lifestyles that you can have as a family. So just understand that they're trying to convince us that their way of living, their way of thinking is what is true and our way is false. Not because that is actually what is going on, but because thinking that and believing that will only further their interests. So the question is, are we really going to continue on living to serve their interests? Are we going to now start backing away and trying to serve our own interests? So that's all I have on this topic. And I would love to see your comments. I will see you all in another video.